Hey guys, I want to show you how to take an application like this where we have a Node.js server and a React client and we're using GraphQL and actually take this into production and deploy it so anyone can come and access it. Now we're going to be using Docker to do this, but before we talk about how Docker works and how to use that, we need to get our backend set up, our server with Babel, and start getting that to work. And I'll talk about more about what I'm talking about in a second. Before we get into that in Babel, there's a quick bug I want to demonstrate to you guys and how we can fix it. So if you create a brand new channel like so, and you just start typing stuff, when you get to the very top, notice how the scroll bar hasn't started yet. But as soon as I start typing a couple more messages, the scroll bar is going to appear because we're going to overflow, and it's going to jump because it thinks we are fetching more items. So hello, how are you? See how we didn't see how are you, and we're kind of like midway through the scroll, and we have to scroll down to the bottom and then say hey bottom, and now we're at the bottom. The reason for that is in our message container, this number is too big when we have a small scroll bar, or I guess this is a big scroll bar. When there's not a lot to scroll, this is not enough. So now we're going to change this to something like 20. We'll give this a refresh and we'll create a new channel, and that will be gone. So C8, pop over here. Now if I type a bunch of messages, you notice how the messages are always at the bottom. Hey latest. So we're good, and it doesn't break. Give that a refresh. If we go over to general, for example, it does not break infinite scrolling over here. We can still continue to scroll. So cool. So that's the place where you can just come over here if you're having problems with the scrolling, is come fix, tweak this number to where it works well for you. And then also another one you can play with is here, or we're calling handle scroll. Okay. So let's start getting our backend set up and ready so we can start using Docker. So first thing I want to do is talk about one of our resolvers, and I believe it is, I think it's a message resolver, yes. So right now you'll notice we are hard coding localhost 8081. Now when we're using Docker and we put this out into production, this URL can change. So really what we want to do is we want to detect what our URL is and put that here instead of hard coding it like so. So here is what Stack Overflow recommends. So in Express there are we have a request object, and that has a protocol and these variables right here that we're going to use to get the full URL. Now second answer, top answer here, recommends using this URL from Node.js to format it, so we'll go ahead and do this instead of just doing a string concatenation. I guess actually we don't need a path name, so we'll just do string concatenation, but here are two different options you can choose. You can have URL format for you, or just concatenate it yourself. And I'll put a link in the description below if you want to check the Stack Overflow out. But in our index file, so index.js, we have access to this request object right here, and we can feed into our context. So I'm just going to say server URL, paste in this, and put that there. Give that a save, and there we go. Now for us, this original URL at the end here is going to be /GraphQL. We don't need that part, we just care about the host and the protocol. And I'm going to turn this into a string template real quick, like that. Like that. Give that a save. Okay. So now in our resolver over here, I don't have to use this, but I can use server URL. And the server URL is coming from the context. So parent args context, grab the server URL. Okay. So now let's make sure this works. If you remember, we're using that this to format the URL, and the URL is for pictures. Alright, our server restarted. So if our picture works over here, we know, and we see our Timo head, awesome. So cool, so now we're good. So this will, we won't have to make any changes. The other alternative that you can do is you can actually just put an environment variable and then change the variable as things change. So I mentioned Babel earlier. In our package.json, if you remember at the very beginning, to let us use import and async functions, we were using Babel node. But Babel node is not good to use in production. If we come on over here to Babel's website, it tells us you should not use this in production at all because it has heavy memory usage. So there's a better way to do it. So Babel supplies a way to actually build out our project. That way we can, instead of calling Babel node, we can just call node on index.js. Now to help us do this, for whatever reason, I did not create a source folder earlier. So we're just going to create a source folder now and move our whole project into that, because ideally you should have a source folder. So auth, batch functions, format errors, index.js, pub/sub, permissions.js. Okay, so here's all our source code and source. All this other stuff is extra stuff we don't need. So now what we can do is create a build script, and I can run Babel, and we're going to do -d, and we're going to Babel on source, and we're going to say dist. So what the heck does this command do that I just wrote? So what it does is Babel is going to run on our source directory. So it's going to look at all the source files here, and it's going to transpile them or transform them into regular JavaScript that is not using async functions and such, and put it in a dist folder. So notice how we have no dist folder here, but okay, so this is crashing. I'm going to turn this off real quick. And also note, we're going to have to do start source/index.js now, since we put everything in source. And let's actually start this back up and make sure we didn't, while moving it, we didn't miss any files or folders or anything. Alright, looks like it started up okay, and I'm just going to refresh over here. Make sure it loads. Good. Okay, now we're going to turn this off. We're not going to need it right now. So in the command line over here, I have the server pulled up, and I'm just going to do npm run build. And you'll notice what it's doing is it's going through every single file that we have in our source, and it's spitting out that same file in the dist. So if we come over here and look at dist, we can actually look at some of these files. So index.js, and you'll notice there's just a bunch of rubbish JavaScript. But this is actually, you'll notice it's using var instead of let and const, and this is actually your code transformed into basic JavaScript instead of using const and let. And so with this dist that we have now here, we go back to package.json. Instead of calling Babel node on source index, I'm going to create a new script called serve, where we just use node and we call on dist/index.js. So now that we use Babel to do that, spit out all these files in dist, what we can do is we can serve those files using regular node, because node can understand that now, because we got rid of all the fancy JavaScript. But it works the exact same. So I'm going to do npm run serve, and we have an error. It's called regenerator runtime error. And the reason why we're getting this is because we're using async and await, and we need to do one extra thing. So here is the page that Babel has on this regenerator runtime, and it recommends adding this regenerator transform plugin. But I have tried this before, and for whatever reason, I still get that error. And they say basically download this regenerator runtime package. But the thing that has worked for me before is doing this right here. And I'll link this Stack Overflow in the description below if you want to check it out as well. So the two top answer here, this one recommends using Babel polyfill, but the one that has worked for me in the past and that we're going to be using is to install this plugin. So we're going to come over here, and we'll do this over here so you guys can see this better. We're going to say yarn add dev, and so we're going to add this Babel plugin transform runtime. And then in our .babel RC, we're going to add a plugin. And the plugin that we're going to add is this transform runtime. Now for me, I didn't even have to play with any settings. The default one worked fine for me. And then we just need to save the Babel runtime as a regular dependency. So I'm going to do yarn add and paste in Babel runtime. And I believe you have to build again, so we'll clear this. So I'm going to run npm run build. And also note, when you run npm run build, you're going to have to run build every single time you make a change to your source. And that is why we were actually using Babel node, so we didn't have to run Babel and build it. You pretty much just do this build whenever you want to deploy it. Okay, so we just built it again. Now when I do npm run serve, we shouldn't get any problems and it should start up. Cool. So now we see this blank wall of text that we usually see when our server starts up, and we'll notice it's the exact same server running the exact same code, just on node instead of Babel node now. So if I refresh, we notice we're fetching the same messages. If we scroll up, we're fetching more stuff here as usual. So nothing has changed on our front end. The code works exactly the same. All we did was transpile, change it from fancy JavaScript to regular JavaScript that the browser will understand and that Node understands. Since we won't be running this in the browser anyway, right? We'll just be running this with Node. So this will actually be node dis/index. This is the server we'll be running in production, just like that. Now, of course, we'll want to use the production env flag, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But that's all I wanted to do for this video, is to show you guys how you can actually build what we have here using Babel node. Take that, all this fancy stuff, build it out into separate files over here, and then this dist file is what we will be using with Docker. We actually won't even be using source for Docker. We'll be using dist. So that's it for this video, guys. In the next one, we'll be starting up with Docker and setting up our environment and all that jazz, and running our production environment locally and then taking it into deploying that. So thanks you guys for watching, and I'll see you soon.